I'm joined by our visiting scholar, Dr. Stephen Willing. We've been talking about critical thinking, Christian character. Steve, the Bible talks a lot about the vice of pride. C.S. Lewis calls it the great sin of pride. Contrast that with humility, and you talk about intellectual humility. What is intellectual humility, and why should we value it?
Intellectual humility is actually a technical term that has come into the literature in about the last 10 years. Psychologists and social scientists have become interested in researching this topic, and there's been a run of publications on it. Many of them are being conducted by Christians who've gone into these fields, but not all of it by Christians. It's something that they're attempting to quantify, to measure. But what is it? Intellectual humility really amounts to a little more than acceptance of reality. And what do I mean by that? Intellectual humility is admitting the limits that we know are there, admitting that we never will know all of the facts, that our reasoning and thinking will never be perfect, that we are not infallible. Yet so many people seem to think they are infallible when it comes to one opinion or another. I'm really reminded of the great R.C. Sproul, one of the great scholars, theologians, teachers of our time. And I remember hearing on a tape of his many, many years ago, where he said, when he passes on to the next life and appears before God, if he found out that he was 80% right in his theology, he would consider that a tremendous achievement. So this is one of the most brilliant theologians of the generation that preceded me, admitting that he thought he could be wrong in as much as 20%. This is startling and it's inspiring because we see an awful lot of the opposite in our society. We see an awful lot of people who think their exegesis of Genesis or any other book of the Bible is infallible and everybody else is obviously wrong or a heretic. We see people who have the spiritual gift of seeing one side to every issue and one answer to every question. But I've poured through the Bible pretty carefully, and I've never seen that know-it-all is one of the gifts of the Spirit.
Amen. Now, so intellectual humility doesn't mean that we can't hold strong convictions. It doesn't mean that we don't think that we're right, but it does mean that we have a cautiousness. We have a deliberate approach to things, and we give consideration. The Bible is true, but the way we interpret it may not always be. And so this is really a humility that's applied to the intellect and to the broad spirituality.
Absolutely, and it's probably the most important critical expression of humility that we should pursue in our Christian life. Jonathan Edwards famously talked about humility, and he asked rhetorically what it is, and he said it's simply having too high an opinion of ourselves. And he said, by definition, you don't know when you're proud because you never can acknowledge, you can never know if you have an opinion of yourself that is too high. We always think our opinion of ourselves is exactly right. More importantly, Edwards saw that pride was the greatest threat to those who were striving to live for Christ, that of those who were in the church, who were seeking to lead, who were seeking to grow, that pride was the greatest pitfall that they faced. And humility is simply having a proper conception of oneself. It's not self-effacement. It's not thinking too high of yourself, which is pride. It's not thinking too low of yourself, but thinking properly of oneself. Pride appears in many realms of our life. We can have excessive confidence in our control of our lives and the situations around us. We can have excessive confidence in our abilities. We can have excessive confidence in our virtue. I mean, all of works righteousness is based on the idea that you can be good enough. All of those are expressions of pride, but the most dangerous is excessive confidence in one's own rightness.
So in the series, we've really been talking about bringing spiritual virtue to the life of the mind, that as a Christian, We're to be rigorous and thoughtful thinkers, but we're also to bring those deep spiritual truths of grace and humility and love to the life of the mind. And that's kind of a distinctive that is different from the non-Christian systems of today.
In general terms, yes, although you will find that humility is referenced in many other worldviews. Supposedly, I've heard that Mohammed says you cannot get into heaven without an ounce of humility. So it's there. Confucius wrote about the importance of humility, but one thing unique about Christianity is we have a God who humbled himself. That is far, far beyond anything else any other worldview is conceptualized, but the idea that the God in heaven, the creator of the universe, would come down and descend to live among us, be born as a baby, and eventually be tortured and murdered, that is sort of the ultimate expression of humility. And if we worship a God who can humble himself from such a lofty perch, certainly we can do the same.
I think of the Philippians 2 passage that the Lord emptied himself and didn't hold on to his advantages. So that's very good. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Ken.